Chen balanced 3 plates while carrying coffee, navigating Meridian's crowded dining room. At 26, she had perfected invisible service, present when needed, absent when not, maintaining her professional smile like part of her uniform. Her silver locket caught light as she refilled water glasses. Inside was her only treasure, a photo of 11-year-old Danny, her brother, taken during better hospital days. His bright smile contrasted sharply with the pale, thin boy she visited nightly after shifts. Emma worked double shifts for 3 years since Danny's leukemia diagnosis destroyed their world. Medical bills crushed them despite insurance. Experimental treatments offering hope weren't covered. Every tip, every extra hour, every saved penny went toward keeping Danny alive. Their parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, leaving Emma to raise Danny at barely 21. She dropped out of college, abandoned teaching dreams, and threw herself into service work, where cash tips bridged gaps between Danny's needs and their meager resources. The locket was their mother's. Emma wore it daily, remembering why she endured long hours, demanding customers, and constant worry gnawing her stomach. Danny was her world, her responsibility, her reason for facing each uncertain day. Moving through the restaurant, Emma noticed the man at table 12, nursing the same coffee for 2 hours, expensive laptop open as he worked in focused silence. His expensive suit and bearing suggested importance, but something in his posture spoke of weariness that went beyond business fatigue. She had seen that look before, the particular exhaustion that came from carrying burdens alone. It was the same expression she wore when looking in mirrors, the face of someone responsible for more than they could easily handle. The afternoon was winding down, and soon she would need to leave for the hospital. Danny would be waiting, probably with new jokes from the nurses and questions about her day. Those moments made everything worthwhile. Chapter 2. A Stranger's Dignity. Alexander Winters reviewed quarterly reports determining 3,000 employees' fates. At 38, he commanded a billion-dollar empire, but today felt endless. The morning's custody hearing hadn't gone as planned. His ex-wife's lawyers had delayed visitation rights again. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Alexander remained at the corner table, finding solace in Meridian's quiet atmosphere. Here, he could work without recognition or interruption from business associates. The staff treated him like any customer, rather than the CEO whose face graced magazine covers. His phone buzzed with urgent messages, but Alexander ignored them. Today, billion-dollar deals felt meaningless compared to the ache from missing his son. 3 months since he'd last seen David. 3 months since his ex-wife moved across country, making visitation nearly impossible. When Alexander finally signaled for the check, the waitress who'd quietly refilled his coffee approached with a genuine smile rather than practiced politeness. She was young, mid-20s, with kind eyes suggesting she understood carrying burdens. "Just coffee today, sir?" she asked softly. "Yes, thank you. You've been very attentive." Emma handed him the $47 check. Alexander reached for his platinum credit card, used thousands of times without thought. But when the reader beeped with error messages, familiar knots formed in his stomach. He tried again, then once more, each declined transaction echoing louder than it should. The banking error freezing his accounts temporarily was minor, resolvable with a phone call, but surrounded by Meridian's quiet elegance, it felt like public humiliation. Alexander's face flushed as he realized he had no cash, no other cards, no way to pay for simple coffee. The irony wasn't lost. A man worth billions, unable to cover a $47 tab. Other customers began noticing. A woman at the neighboring table whispered to her companion. Alexander could feel their attention, the particular embarrassment of dignity stripped away in public. In high-end dining, being unable to pay was more than inconvenience. It was social catastrophe. Chapter 3. An Act of Grace. Emma watched the man's expression change as his credit card declined repeatedly. She recognized this look, the particular embarrassment when someone's dignity was stripped away publicly. Her father had worn it when laid off, the same vulnerability she'd felt asking for hospital payment extensions. Other customers were noticing. The woman at the neighboring table whispered something, and Emma felt the man's discomfort radiating across the space. In high-end dining, being unable to pay was more than inconvenience. It was social catastrophe. Without hesitation, Emma made a decision that would change everything. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said quietly, approaching with practiced discretion. "There seems to be an issue with our card reader today. This one's on the house." She pulled 2 20s and a 10 from her wallet, money saved for Danny's medication, and discreetly placed them in the check folder. The lie came easily, delivered with her perfected professional smile. Alexander looked up, gray eyes reflecting gratitude and confusion. "I couldn't possibly—" "Please," Emma interrupted gently. "It happens more often than you'd think. Technical difficulties." She watched him struggle between accepting kindness or insisting on finding another payment method. Pride warred with practicality in his expression, and Emma recognized the battle intimately. She'd fought it countless times over 5 years. "I'll make this right," he said finally, voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, I'll be back to settle this properly." "There's no need," Emma replied, though they both knew he would return. Men like him, she could tell he was important by his clothes, bearing obvious discomfort at being helped, always kept promises. Alexander stood slowly, gathering his laptop and coat. He paused, looking like he wanted to say more, but words seemed to escape him. Instead, he simply nodded, a gesture conveying more gratitude than any speech. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You have no idea what this means." Emma watched him walk toward the exit, shoulders straighter now that his dignity was preserved. She had no way of knowing she'd just helped one of America's most powerful men, or that her simple kindness had touched something deep within his carefully guarded heart. Chapter 4. Searching for Answers. 3 days later, Alexander returned to Meridian with purpose beyond settling debt. He'd spent intervening time thinking about the young waitress who'd saved him from embarrassment, trying to understand why her kindness had affected him so profoundly. In a world where people usually wanted something from him, her selfless gesture felt revelatory. He arrived during dinner shift, hoping to find her working. The hostess, a polished woman in her 30s, greeted him with practiced warmth reserved for obviously wealthy customers. "Table for one this evening?" "Actually, I'm looking for one of your waitresses. She helped me a few days ago. Young woman, Asian, very kind. I'd like to thank her properly." "That would be Emma," the hostess replied with knowing smile. "She's working tonight. Table 14 is in her section." Alexander was seated with clear dining room view, allowing him to observe Emma working. She moved with the same quiet efficiency he remembered, but tonight he noticed overlooked details. How she paused to listen intently when elderly customers spoke, her gentle manner with a crying child at table 6, the tired set of her shoulders suggesting burdens beyond her years. When Emma finally approached his table, her eyes widened with recognition. "You came back. I told you I would." Alexander pulled out an envelope containing $500 cash. "This should more than cover the other day, with interest." Emma stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "That's really not necessary. It was just coffee." "It was more than coffee, and we both know it." Alexander studied her face, noting dark circles under her eyes, how her hand unconsciously went to the silver locket at her throat. "You used your own money, didn't you?" The question hung between them, Emma's silence answering enough. "Why?" he asked quietly. "You don't know me. I could have been anyone." Emma considered the question, fingers still touching her locket. "Everyone deserves dignity," she said finally. "And sometimes we all need help, even when we don't expect it." The simple honesty hit Alexander like a physical blow. In his world of calculated moves and strategic relationships, such uncomplicated kindness was rare. Chapter 5. Unexpected Connections. Emma's first instinct was declining. She'd learned caution around customers showing too much interest, especially wealthy ones who might mistake professional kindness for something personal. But something different about Alexander. A genuine quality seeming at odds with his expensive clothes and obvious wealth. "I appreciate the offer, but I usually visit my brother after work," she said, hand instinctively going to her locket again. "Your brother?" Alexander noticed the gesture, how her expression softened when mentioning him. "He's in the hospital. I try to see him every day." Emma hesitated, then added, "He's 11. Leukemia." The words hung between them, and Alexander felt something shift in his chest. He understood worry for a child, the helpless feeling of watching someone you love suffer. "I'm sorry," he said, Emma hearing sincerity in his voice. "That must be incredibly difficult." "It is, but he's strong, stronger than me most days." Emma's smile was tinged with sadness. He keeps telling me not to worry, that he's going to beat this thing. Sometimes I think he's taking care of me instead of the other way around. Alexander found himself thinking of his own son, David, who would be 9 now. He wondered if David had his mother's stubbornness, or his own determination, if he still loved dinosaurs and hated vegetables. The custody battle had stolen so much time, so many irretrievable moments. Children are remarkable that way, he said quietly. They have strength adults often underestimate. Something in his tone made Emma look more carefully. There was sadness matching her own, recognition of loss going beyond sympathy. "Do you have children?" she asked. "A son, David. I don't get to see him as much as I'd like." The admission came easier than Alexander expected. Perhaps it was Emma's openness about her struggles, or how she listened without judgment. "I'm sorry. That must be hard." "It is." Alexander paused, then made a surprising decision. "Look, I know you need to see your brother, but would you mind if I walked with you? I'd like to hear more about him, and maybe you'd like to hear about David." Emma studied his face, seeing past the expensive suit to the lonely father underneath. She recognized the look because she'd seen it in her own mirror, the expression of someone carrying too much weight alone. Chapter 6. The hospital visit. Children's hospital at night had different energy than during day. Hallways were quieter, lighting softer, and the sense of families holding vigil was more pronounced. Alexander followed Emma through corridors smelling of antiseptic and hope, past rooms where parents slept in uncomfortable chairs beside small beds. Emma moved through the hospital with familiarity of someone who'd spent countless hours within these walls. She nodded to nurses, knew which elevators were fastest, and carried herself with quiet confidence of belonging to this community of families fighting for their children's lives. "Danny's room is just down here," she said, approaching the pediatric oncology ward. "He might be asleep, but he's usually awake around this time. He says evening is when he feels most like himself." Alexander felt his chest tighten, walking past rooms filled with children too young to understand why their bodies were betraying them. It reminded him of his own fears about David, constant worry that something might happen to his son while they were apart. "Emma!" a young voice called as they approached room 314. "I was wondering when you'd get here." The boy in bed was small for 11, face pale but animated with genuine joy at seeing his sister. A colorful bandana covered his head, and despite IV lines and medical equipment surrounding him, his smile was radiant. "Hey, troublemaker," Emma said, her entire demeanor transforming as she bent to kiss his forehead. "How are you feeling today?" "Better now that you're here. And you brought a friend." Danny's eyes lit up, noticing Alexander in the doorway. "This is Alexander," Emma said. "Alexander, meet my brother Danny, the strongest person I know." Alexander stepped forward, struck by the boy's immediate warmth. "It's nice to meet you, Danny. Your sister has told me a lot about you. All good things, I hope." Danny grinned. "She likes to exaggerate about how brave I am. Really, I just don't have much choice in the matter." The boy's matter-of-fact acceptance reminded Alexander painfully of his own son's resilience. Children had ways of adapting to circumstances that would break adults, finding joy in small moments and hope in darkest situations. As they talked, Alexander found himself drawn into easy conversation between siblings who'd learned to find lightness in heavy circumstances. Danny was curious about everything: Alexander's work, travels, thoughts on hospital food, and his questions came with directness only children possessed. Chapter 7. A shocking discovery. The locket had shifted when Emma leaned forward to show Danny a video on her phone, and for just a moment Alexander caught a glimpse of the photograph inside. His breath caught in his throat, and he felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The boy in the photograph looked exactly like his son David. Alexander's heart began racing as he tried processing what he was seeing. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dark hair, same bright eyes, even the same mischievous smile David had inherited from his mother. For a moment, Alexander wondered if he was losing his mind, if stress from the custody battle and missing his son was making him see things that weren't there. But as Emma moved again and the locket caught light, Alexander knew he wasn't imagining it. The photograph showed a boy who could have been David's twin, or perhaps Emma, he said quietly, voice strained. "That locket? May I ask about the photograph?" Emma's hand went instinctively to the silver pendant, a protective gesture Alexander recognized. "It's Danny, from before he got sick. It was our mother's locket." "Before he got sick?" Alexander's mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. How long ago was that photo taken? About 2 years ago, maybe a little more. Why? Alexander felt his world shifting as pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed began falling into place. The timing, the resemblance, the fact that Emma and Danny were orphans, it all pointed to a possibility that seemed impossible yet increasingly likely. "Danny," Alexander said, turning to the boy with new eyes, "can you tell me about your parents? What were their names?" Danny looked puzzled by the question, but answered readily. "Michael and Sarah Chen. They died in a car accident when I was 6. Emma's been taking care of me ever since." The names meant nothing to Alexander, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. His ex-wife had remarried, could have changed her name, could have... "Danny, this might sound like a strange question, but do you remember anything from before the accident? Anything about your early childhood?" Emma was looking at Alexander with growing concern. "Why are you asking these questions?" Alexander struggled with how to explain without sounding insane. "The photograph in your locket. The boy looks remarkably like my son. Remarkably like David." Chapter 8. Unraveling the Truth. The photograph on Alexander's phone showed a boy unmistakably similar to Danny. Not identical, but close enough to be brothers. Or perhaps the same child at different ages. Emma stared at the image, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. That looks like me," Danny said quietly, voice filled with confusion. "But older. How is that possible?" Emma's hands were shaking as she opened her locket fully, comparing the two photographs side by side. The resemblance was undeniable, but it raised questions that threatened to shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Danny is my brother. He's always been my brother." Alexander felt his heart breaking for both of them. "Emma, I think we need to consider the possibility that Danny might be David. My son disappeared 5 years ago during a bitter custody battle. My ex-wife took him and vanished. I've been searching for him ever since." "No," Emma said firmly, standing from her chair. "That's impossible. Danny was with us during the accident. He was in the car. He was hurt too." But even as she spoke, Emma realized she had no actual memory of Danny being in the car that night. She had been told he was there, had been told he survived while their parents died, but her own memories of that night were fragmented by trauma and grief. Danny was looking between the two adults with growing distress. "Emma, what's happening? Who is this man?" Emma sat back down and took Danny's hand, her protective instincts overriding her own confusion. "I don't know, sweetheart, but whatever's happening, we'll figure it out together." Alexander could see fear in both their faces and felt a wave of guilt for disrupting their world. But if Danny was really David, then he had found his son, the son he had been searching for desperately for 5 years. "There's a way to know for certain," Alexander said gently. "A DNA test. It's simple, painless, and it would give us answers." "And if the test shows what you think it will?" Emma asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alexander looked at Danny, at the boy who might be his son, and felt his heart breaking for all of them. "Then we'll figure out how to move forward. Together." The word "together" hung in the air, a promise that felt both hopeful and terrifying. Chapter 9. A Night of Questions. Emma stayed at the hospital long after visiting hours ended, nurses allowing her to remain because they knew her story and understood her need to be close to Danny. She sat in the chair beside his bed, watching him sleep and trying to reconcile the boy she had raised with the possibility that he might belong to someone else. Danny had fallen asleep troubled, asking questions she couldn't answer about the strange man and his photographs. Emma had done her best to reassure him, but her own certainty was crumbling with each passing hour. She pulled out her phone and stared at Alexander's business card. Alexander Winters, CEO, Winters Global Industries. A quick internet search revealed he was indeed one of America's wealthiest men, but more importantly, it confirmed his story about a missing son. Articles about his custody battle and David's disappearance were heartbreaking, painting a picture of a father desperate to find his child. Emma found herself studying every photo of David she could find online, comparing them to her memories of Danny at different ages. The resemblance was undeniable, but it raised questions that made her feel sick to her stomach. Had the people she thought were her parents really been her parents? Had they taken Danny from his real father? The car accident that had supposedly killed Michael and Sarah Chen, had it been real? Or had it been a cover story to explain Danny's presence in their lives? Emma's memories of her childhood were clear and consistent, but Danny's early years were hazier. She had always attributed this to his young age, but now she wondered if there was another explanation. Had her parents, the people she had called her parents, kidnapped David and created a new identity for him as Danny Chen? The thought made Emma feel physically ill. If it was true, then she had unknowingly been part of keeping a father from his son. But Danny was her brother in every way that mattered. She had raised him, loved him, sacrificed everything for him. How could she reconcile that with the possibility that he belonged to someone else? As dawn approached, Emma made a decision. She needed answers, not just for Alexander, but for Danny and for herself. The truth, whatever it was, had to be better than the uncertainty that was tearing her apart. She pulled out her phone and dialed Alexander's number. Chapter 10. The test results. The DNA test had been conducted with clinical efficiency, a simple cheek swab that would either confirm or destroy the theory that had turned their worlds upside down. Alexander had arranged for expedited processing, and within 48 hours, they had their answer. Dr. Martinez, the hospital's head of pediatric oncology, had agreed to deliver the results in Danny's room, understanding the sensitive nature of the situation. Emma sat on one side of Danny's bed, Alexander on the other, while the boy looked between them with intuitive understanding that his life was about to change dramatically. "The DNA test confirms it," Dr. Martinez said gently. "Danny and Alexander are father and son." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma felt her world tilt and shift, everything she thought she knew rearranging itself into a new configuration. Danny, her Danny, was David Winters, the son Alexander had been searching for desperately for 5 years. "So I'm not really Danny Chen?" the boy asked, voice small and confused. "You're David Winters," Alexander said softly, eyes filled with tears he was trying not to shed. "You're my son. I've been looking for you for so long." Danny, David, looked at Emma with panic in his eyes. "But Emma is my sister. That doesn't change, right?" Emma's heart broke as she saw the fear in his face, the terror that his entire world was being taken away. "I'll always be your Emma," she promised, taking his hand. "That will never change." Alexander watched the interaction between them and felt a complex mix of emotions. Joy at finding his son, grief for the years they had lost, and deep gratitude toward Emma for the love and care she had given David when he couldn't. "David," Alexander said carefully, "I know this is confusing and scary. I don't expect you to understand everything right away, or to suddenly feel like my son, but I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you, and I never stopped loving you." "What happened to me?" David asked. "Why don't I remember you?" Alexander looked at Emma, understanding that this conversation would be painful for everyone involved. "Your mother and I were having problems. When we divorced, she was supposed to share custody with me, but instead, she took you and disappeared. I think the people you knew as your parents might have been helping her hide you." "What happens now?" Emma asked, voice barely audible. Alexander looked at both of them and made a decision. "Now, we become a family, all of us." Chapter 11. Building a new family. The weeks following the DNA revelation were a delicate dance of adjustment and discovery. Alexander had immediately taken over all of David's medical expenses, ensuring that experimental treatments Emma had been struggling to afford were now readily available. But more importantly, he approached the situation with sensitivity that surprised Emma. Rather than demanding immediate custody or trying to erase David's life as Danny Chen, Alexander worked to build bridges. He visited the hospital daily, not as a stranger trying to reclaim his son, but as a father getting to know the remarkable boy his child had become. David's response was cautious but curious. The name David felt foreign on his tongue, but he began to remember fragments of his early childhood. A large house with a swimming pool, a man who read him bedtime stories, a sense of loss he had never been able to explain. "I remember you teaching me to ride a bike," David said one afternoon as Alexander sat beside his hospital bed. "There was a park with a big hill, and you ran behind me holding the seat." Alexander's eyes filled with tears. "Riverside Park. You were 4 years old and so determined to ride without training wheels. You made me promise not to let go, but when you finally got your balance, you yelled at me to let go so you could do it yourself." "I was always stubborn," David grinned, and Alexander could see glimpses of the little boy he had lost. Emma watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. She was genuinely happy that David was reconnecting with his father, but she couldn't shake the fear that she was becoming unnecessary in his life. Alexander seemed to sense her concerns. One evening, as visiting hours were ending, he asked Emma to join him for coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "You're worried about your place in David's life," he said without preamble. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "Emma, I need you to understand something. You didn't just keep my son alive for 5 years. You gave him love, stability, and values that I can see in every interaction he has. You made him into the remarkable boy he is today. But now he has his real family back," Emma said quietly. "You are his real family," Alexander said firmly. "Biology doesn't erase 5 years of love and sacrifice." Alexander paused, then continued with words that would change everything. "I want to offer you a partnership in raising him." Chapter 12. A New Beginning. 6 months later, David's cancer was in remission, and the family that had formed from tragedy and coincidence was thriving in ways none of them had expected. Alexander had purchased a penthouse apartment with enough space for everyone, including a room designed specifically for David's recovery and Emma's peace of mind. Emma had left her job at Meridian, but not to become dependent on Alexander's wealth. Instead, she had enrolled in a nursing program specializing in pediatric oncology, her experience with David's illness having shown her a calling she never knew she had. Alexander was funding her education as an investment in her future, not charity. David was adjusting to his dual identity with the resilience that had carried him through his illness. He was David Winters in legal documents and medical records, but he remained Danny to Emma and to himself. Alexander had learned to love both versions of his son, the little boy he had lost, and the remarkable young man Emma had helped him become. The silver locket that had started it all now contained 2 photographs, the original picture of David as Danny, and a new family photo taken on the day David was declared cancer-free. Emma wore it every day, a reminder of the journey that had brought them together. On a quiet Sunday morning, as they sat together in the hospital's family lounge during one of David's routine checkups, Alexander reflected on the chain of events that had led them here. A declined credit card, a waitress's kindness, a photograph in a locket. Such small moments that had created something beautiful and unexpected. "Emma," he said, watching David play chess with another young patient across the room, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't helped me that night at the restaurant?" Emma smiled, her hand unconsciously going to her locket. "I try not to think about alternate realities. This one is pretty amazing. Even with everything we've been through, the confusion, the fear, the uncertainty, especially because of all that," Emma replied. "The best families aren't born, they're built. And sometimes they're built from the most unexpected circumstances." Alexander nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They had all lost something. He had lost years with his son. David had lost his early memories and sense of identity, and Emma had lost the simple certainty of her family structure. But in finding each other, they had gained something more valuable. As David looked up from his chess game and waved at them, his smile bright and healthy, Alexander knew that Emma was right. The best families were indeed built, not born.